Today's discussion is going to focus on a topic near and dear to everyone's heart, which is getting better response rates to emails. Email still is a very dominant communication method, a very powerful sales tool, but a lot of times folks are finding that we're getting less and less responses with the emails that we're sending out. We can talk about email content. We have actually hosted a lot of calls talking about different angles to lead with. And today's discussion is going to talk about another strategy, which you can see here if you join the webinar, which is focused on leveraging executive assistants. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily associate executive assistants for sales processes, but we'll show today real briefly how powerful they are in acquiring new customers. So we put together a little formula here for you. It's pretty simple. When you use executive assistants to engage with prospects or potential clients, we found that through different experiments that we've ran, that the response rate and the close ratio goes up by about 23%. And so it's a pretty significant increase. And so when you engage executive assistants, and we'll talk about how to do that, they definitely pay for themselves, not only in terms of sales, but also in terms of saving you time. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, we've done a lot of different calls on different types of angles and content and strategies that you can use when it comes to actually emailing prospects. All of these different calls that we've talked about will apply to today's formula with engaging and using executive assistants. But let me just walk you through a few of these so that you can kind of remember a few of the different strategies that you can actually employ when you're using your executive assistants. So on our last discussion, we talked about dissatisfied prospects, how to identify them, where to find them. So this is a great resource. Also creating a group purchasing. This is an easy way to lower your customer acquisition costs. We can also find companies who are complaining about, or companies that are experiencing challenges with their phone systems, which is similar to the dissatisfied prospects. We can also do experimental selling, which is a great strategy. Win-backs, the IT job strategy. I won't go into too many details, but that's also a really good strategy to work with to engage all kinds of companies. Office 365 audits, research reports, government referrals. It's one of my favorites for enterprise deals. Volunteerism and surveys. So again, we'll make sure that all the links to each of these calls and trainings are available in the follow-up. But we just wanted to highlight those real quick because it's really important to have a strategy behind the emails, because otherwise you're going to be wasting your time, the prospect's time, and your executive assistant's time. And that's not what we want to do. So again, you need to leverage some type of strategy. It doesn't necessarily just need to be, have you considered upgrading to UCaaS, or do you want to get a quote on a new bandwidth circuit? Obviously, that's not something any of you would do, but oftentimes we leave the strategy out of the execution, and that's without that in the formula, it really makes it difficult to win new opportunities. Now, as far as working with the executive assistants, I wanted to show you an actual example of what something would look like if you were to send it out. So you would hire an executive assistant. We'll talk about how to do that in a second. But if we were using a strategy here, one of the strategies that we talked about earlier, which is the experimental strategy, this is an example of what the email might look like. So the email would come from your executive assistant. The title or subject line would be something along the lines of meeting with Justin Chugg or meeting request, but something that would be associated with what you're trying to do. And then you would say something along the lines of, I'm the executive assistant for Justin Chugg. He's asked me to reach out to you to see if we could set up an interview with you to better understand your business. The purpose of the meeting is to explore possible experiments he would like to run with you at your business to test a hypothesis for the hospitality industry. Do you have any availability next week? Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can run these email campaigns. This is just one example. I'm sure that you can come up with a lot of better examples based on the different strategies that you're using. But the key here is the beginning of this email where when the prospect sees that an executive assistant for another individual is reaching out to them, this is what ultimately increases the response rates and the close ratios, is because it's coming from an executive assistant. And so because there is a higher close ratio, the executive assistant really pays for itself, because you're going to be making more revenue and saving time. Now, how much, but before we get into hiring the executive assistant, I just wanted to mention that if you want to increase your response rates even higher, you want to make sure you do a carbon copy on the email. Essentially, you want to CC yourself, and that way you're making it feel like a more personalized email, which then makes it much more likely that the prospect will respond to you. And you'll get copied on a lot of the responses as well. But it really makes it feel more official that way. Now, if you need contacts, of course, you can always go to upsellreport.com. You could also execute this strategy directly from LinkedIn if you don't want to have to worry about finding emails, and just go directly there and create a list of prospects and send emails from there. Now, if you're using LinkedIn, you're going to need to have the executive assistant actually use their LinkedIn profile. They could also use your LinkedIn profile, but sometimes they can get a little bit confusing with the prospect if they're emailing as an executive assistant from your profile, but sometimes you can pull that off based on the different types of verbiage that you use. Now, when you're getting executive assistants, my best experience has been going to Upwork. There's a lot of companies that will provide you executive assistants. We've talked about this with Jay Papasan on the book interview on the One Thing. He gave a lot of good advice. We're definitely going to dive into this a little bit further on how to leverage executive assistants. But for today's discussion, we just wanted to highlight Upwork. I've worked with a lot of different executive assistants that they typically range in price from $3 to $6 an hour. So it's really quite cost effective. Like I said, it pays for itself because of the higher close ratio. But we'll talk a little bit about here in just a second about how to get a cost-effective executive assistant, because you may end up paying $15 an hour for a native English speaker, but you don't necessarily need that. One way to get around that, because pretty much any executive assistants, they're going to speak pretty decent English, which makes it easy to work with them and engage with them, but not probably enough to be able to respond to the email campaigns. And if you're CCing yourself, a lot of times you can just jump into the conversation, but sometimes they may respond directly to the executive assistant, and having them be able to handle some of those responses will actually alleviate a lot of the costs and time associated with acquiring new customers. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to use the email template solutions built into different email platforms. So our organization uses Gmail, and if you click on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a template system already built into Gmail. Office 365 and pretty much any other email platform will probably have something similar. But based on the responses that come back from the individuals, you can train your executive assistant to respond with different email templates to continue forward with the prospects and working with them. And so what this does is it doesn't require that your executive assistant be 100% fluent in English, because you're typically going to be outsourcing somebody from overseas or in South America. And so that's how you're able to keep the costs low on this whole platform. But using the templates definitely makes it a lot easier, allows you to control the flow of communication, and then CCing yourself also allows you to jump into the conversation and kind of take over. But typically what you want to do with these executive assistants to ultimately help you lower your customer acquisition costs is to make sure that they're handling all of the negative responses and that they're cleaning out the inbox and helping you focus on the hot leads and letting them work the ones that aren't quite mature enough to actually move forward with. And that's where you save a lot of time and resources. And so not only do you get a higher close ratio, but they're also going to be managing the campaign for you, making it a lot easier for you. Now, this is a great investment. Again, it's only a few words of advice. Typically what you want to do is you want to say, look, I'm going to give you 3 hours of work a week, and that should be plenty of time for you to manage this inbox that you create for them. And that way you stay on budget. You don't have to worry about any surprise costs. You can say, look, $9, here's You manage the campaign. We send out all the emails from you, and then you manage everything for me. And then anything that goes beyond those 3 hours, I'll take care of it myself. But you'll find that probably 3 hours is more than enough time for them to work through your inbox and make sure that everything is prioritized for you. So that's my recommendations. Again, we'll probably talk about executive assistants in greater detail as far as expanding their workload in other areas of the business. But from a sales perspective, this makes a lot of sense because it's just easy for them to manage this, and it has a much higher response rate because it feels much more official and much more important when an executive assistant is reaching out to another prospect. And that's really the purpose of this whole campaign, is to lower customer acquisition costs by getting higher response rates and giving you more time to focus on good opportunities rather than trying to work on responses to companies that aren't